It's 1944. Bombers rumble far away. In fields of Normandy, the wind moves softly over wildflowers and sand. In kitchens across the world, radios whisper of hope, of soldiers returning, of peace perhaps nearing. Let's drift gently into the world of 1944, where courage met quiet endurance, and the world held its breath. Welcome, dear listener, to the year 1944, a year balanced between despair and deliverance. Across the continents, people awoke to the same thought each morning: will this be the day the world begins to heal? It was a year of movement, of shifting tides, and of millions of ordinary souls simply continuing, baking bread, writing letters, sewing uniforms, tending gardens, repairing bicycles, raising children, waiting. In the still moments between news bulletins and air raid sirens, the world found small refuges, the comfort of a warm drink, the murmur of familiar voices, the music that somehow kept playing even as cities trembled. 1944 was both immense and intimate. The great machinery of war turned on every front, yet so did the tiny mechanisms of everyday life. Let's wander softly through its months, through the echoes of battlefields and the hum of radios, through factory floors, quiet prayers, and faint laughter, the sounds of a planet preparing, unknowingly, for dawn. World events. By 1944, the Second World War had entered its fifth relentless year. All around the globe, lines were shifting, not just on maps, but in hearts and homes. In the east, the Soviet Union pushed westward, reclaiming lands once lost to the advancing German army. Entire towns emerged from occupation, weary, hollow, but alive. In the west, the long-awaited Allied invasion of Europe began. On June 6, under a grey dawn sky, the beaches of Normandy filled with ships, parachutes, and prayers. D-Day, they called it. The largest amphibious invasion in history. Yet even here, among the thunder of engines and surf, there were quiet moments, a soldier looking at a photograph in his pocket, another whispering a single word: home. In Italy, battles crept through ancient towns, places of marble and olive trees, as Allied forces moved slowly northward toward Rome, which would be liberated in June. Across the Pacific, islands became stepping stones in a vast ocean struggle: Saipan, Guam, Leyte. The names themselves carried the rhythm of faraway thunder. And in the skies above Japan and Germany, aircraft traced glowing trails at night, silent constellations of conflict, each light a human story. Meanwhile, the resistance movements grew stronger. In occupied France, messages hidden in laundry lines and church bells guided secret operations. In Denmark and the Netherlands, civilians risked everything to shelter others. The war was still raging, but beneath its noise, threads of unity and quiet defiance wove themselves together. In Britain, blackout curtains still covered windows, though the worst of the Blitz was past. Londoners queued calmly for rationed goods, and in small pubs, laughter returned in cautious bursts. In America, the war effort pulsed in every corner, from factory workers rolling out Liberty ships to school children collecting scrap metal. Across oceans and languages, the same silent wish rose each night: let it end soon. One story that shaped 1944. The story that would forever mark 1944 began on the shores of Normandy. In the first light of June 6, thousands of Allied soldiers crossed a stormy English Channel. Operation Overlord, they called it, a name that sounded almost mythic. But on those grey beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword, there were no myths, only rain, wind, and courage. Behind every landing craft, behind every helmet and heartbeat, were years of preparation and hope. The people of northern France awoke to the sound of liberation, the rumble of tanks, the flutter of parachutes, the strange, almost musical rhythm of Morse code tapped from radios hidden in barns. For the first time in years, French villages raised their flags in daylight. Windows opened. Children stepped outside, squinting into freedom. Across Europe, the news spread like a sunrise. In occupied cities, underground presses printed the words, "The invasion has begun." In New York and London, people gathered around radios, holding their breath. The invasion of Normandy was not just a battle, it was the long, trembling bridge to peace. For months afterward, the world moved as if on tiptoe. Each mile the Allies advanced, each village liberated, felt like a heartbeat returning after too long in silence. And though victory was not yet in sight, in 1944 the world began to believe again. Daily life around the world. Beneath the roar of planes and headlines, 1944 was still filled with life's ordinary music. In towns untouched by the front, mornings began with the scrape of a chair, the clink of a teacup, the creak of a bicycle wheel. In war-torn cities, people still gathered at bakeries when flour was available, and swapped recipes that stretched rations further, carrot cakes without sugar, stews thickened with hope more than meat. In London and Warsaw, families kept small gardens, victory gardens, they called them, growing cabbages, onions, and flowers in the same soil. In New York and Chicago, families listened to radio serials each evening, their imaginations carrying them far beyond ration stamps and air raid drills. Women filled the factories, welding, riveting, driving trucks, decoding messages, while men served abroad. It was a time when millions discovered new strength in themselves. Children played with homemade toys. They rolled hoops in alleyways, stitched dolls from scraps, and saved chocolate wrappers like treasures. Letters were lifelines. Every day, millions of envelopes traveled across oceans, carrying pressed flowers, folded prayers, and tiny pieces of normal life. In Japan, families grew quieter as the war deepened. In small shrines, paper cranes multiplied. In Germany, blackout curtains hid both fear and fatigue. And yet everywhere, in huts, in farmhouses, in apartment blocks, people still laughed, fell in love, and dreamed of what they would do after. Science, inventions, and technology. War accelerated invention, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of hope. In 1944, engineers and scientists worked on technologies that would shape peace as much as war. In Britain, radar grew sharper, guiding pilots safely through fog and darkness. Jet aircraft began to lift from runways for the first time, their engines a new sound in the sky. The Americans developed something secret in New Mexico, a project known only by code names and code numbers. It was the beginning of the atomic age, though few knew it then. Medical science advanced quietly. Penicillin, once rare, became mass-produced, saving thousands of soldiers from infections that would once have been fatal. Blood plasma found its way to the front lines, packed in crates that carried life. In homes, people learned to repair and reuse almost everything. Buttons were saved, soap was stretched, clothes were patched. And still, even in scarcity, invention thrived. Simple mechanical toys made from tin cans, radios built from spare wire, makeshift heaters crafted from old oil drums. Across the Atlantic, the world's first digital computers were being assembled. Huge, humming machines meant to crack codes and calculate trajectories. No one yet knew they would one day rest in the palms of our hands. Culture and the arts. Even in the darkest seasons, art continued to bloom. In London, theatres reopened between bombings, actors performing Shakespeare by candlelight to audiences wrapped in coats. In Paris, jazz clubs stirred quietly underground, mixing defiance with melody. In New York, swing music filled the airwaves. Glenn Miller's orchestra played Moonlight Serenade for soldiers abroad, while Bing Crosby's voice drifted through the static of radios everywhere. Hollywood offered escape. In 1944, Films like Going My Way and Meet Me in St. Louis charmed audiences with warmth and song. Ingrid Bergman shone in Gaslight, while Gene Tierney and Tyrone Power became faces of cinematic calm in a turbulent age. Books brought quiet refuge. Strange Fruit by Lillian Smith and A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith reminded readers of humanity's resilience. Artists painted not battlefields but interiors, the stillness of a chair, a window, a waiting room. Music and literature became the lullabies of endurance. Even sports, when possible, continued. Soldiers kicked footballs between shifts. Children raced down alleyways. Life, it seemed, insisted on continuing, stubborn, beautiful, and brave. Media and headlines. The world read its news by radio hum and by paper ink. Headlines of 1944 were short, stark, and heavy with meaning. Rome liberated. Paris free again. Allied forces advance. But nestled among them were smaller joys. New cookie recipe without sugar delights housewives. Victory gardens thrive in summer Sunday. Bobby socks and swing records still in demand. In America, a loaf of bread cost around 10 cents. A movie ticket, 25. Gasoline, when available, was rationed carefully. In Britain, tea remained a precious comfort, and powdered eggs were a household staple. Magazines offered cheerful advice: how to make a new dress from an old one, how to write a letter that travels safely, how to keep spirits bright. Through every medium, hope whispered softly, the end may be near. People born and people died this year. The year 1944 brought both farewells and beginnings. Among those born, musician Jimmy Page, future creator of Electric Legends, Michael Douglas, who would fill cinemas with stories decades later, and poet Patti Smith, whose voice would one day echo the restless soul of another age. Bernadette Peters, Sam Neill, and George Lucas, dreamers who would reshape sound and story, also took their first breaths in 1944. And among those who left, Glenn Miller, the bandleader whose music had lifted millions, disappeared over the English Channel that December, his orchestra continuing in tribute. The painter Edvard Munch, who once captured the scream of humanity, passed away in quiet Oslo, having lived long enough to see the world scream again. Countless others, known and unknown, passed into memory that year, soldiers and civilians, mothers and sons, leaving behind echoes that still hum softly through time. As 1944 came to its end, the world exhaled, slowly, uncertainly. Snow fell on broken cities and blooming gardens alike. Across Europe, bells rang once more in churches long silent. Families gathered in dimly lit rooms, speaking of the future in low voices. In America and the Commonwealth, letters home promised just one more year. The war was not over, but the tide had turned, and people could feel it. The horizon, once endless with smoke, now held the faintest shimmer of peace. Somewhere, a soldier listened to Bing Crosby's "I'll Be Home for Christmas" and smiled through homesick tears. Somewhere else, a child looked up at the stars and wondered what life would be like when the world was quiet again. And in countless kitchens and bedrooms and trenches, candles burned down to stubs, carrying the same silent wish: let the new year bring peace. 1944 ended not with victory parades or fireworks, but with weary gratitude, the kind that grows only in those who have endured. The dawn of 1945 waited just beyond the frost, carrying both sorrow and hope, and the fragile promise of a gentler tomorrow. Thank you for drifting through the year 1944. If your eyes are growing heavy, let them close now, and imagine the slow turning of the world, leaving war behind, inching toward morning. Each year holds its stories, and each story, a lesson in patience and love. If this journey soothed you, I hope you'll stay a while. There are many more years to visit, each whispering its own lullaby. Until next time, may your night be peaceful, and your dreams full of light. Good night.